What exactly is an alpha male? Stick around, let's chat about it today on this episode of Christian Date Coach. Let's hit it. What's up, everybody? My name is drphoenixsingh. I want to warmly welcome you to this episode of Christian Date Coach. As always, it's a blessing to have you here with me, and I please warmly invite you to not only subscribe to this channel and hit that bell so you get notifications every time that we post new original content, but also to feel free to share this video with your friends, with any colleagues or associates, and also with anybody in your congregation who you think may enjoy listening to the content. If you'd be interested in having me come and speak to your congregation, it would be a blessing to do that for you, and I'll go ahead and give you my contact details at the end of the video today. But in the meanwhile, you're more than welcome to follow me at the social media accounts below. So let's jump right in. Even me saying the words alpha male probably brings to mind a lot of things. It's almost like if I say George Washington, right? It was the first American president. Right, if I say George Washington, you probably get a little image in your head. Now, I also get an image in my head. Now, I'm curious what your image is. You know, my image that I get in my head is kind of on the U.S. quarter, right? So like that little profile of George Washington. Maybe you have an entirely different image of George Washington than I do. Now, usually we'll have some things that are kind of in common between what you think about and what I think about. It'll always be a man. Usually it's going to be an older George Washington, not like a teenager, early 20s George Washington, right? Usually he's got like a little, white wig on or something, so like the short hair. Usually he's got quite a pronounced nose, really good kind of like strong posture and these things. So these things will be in common, but it's not going to be always the exact same image, and this is the same with absolutely anything. Same thing if I say dog. Right, I have my childhood dog who was named Lucky in my head. You've probably got, dogs in your life who, when I say dog, you're thinking of them automatically. Now, usually they've got, like 4 paws, and usually they got a tail, and they got the snout, and they're barking, and the whole thing, wagging the tail. Those things may be in common, but the actual dog is usually going to be very different, okay? And it's the same thing with George Washington. It's the same thing when I say alpha male, okay? It's going to be something where you're all going to have a certain image in your head, and that's going to be different, but largely based on culture, and especially these days in terms of movies and TV and radio and these sorts of things, these portrayals. Basically, the concept of an alpha male has become synonymous with things that real alpha males basically are not in most cases, right? So, for example, when we think about the term alpha male, usually we're thinking about like an exceptionally tall, like an exceptionally jacked, ripped up, super strong individual. They tend to be, very handsome. They tend to not express a lot of emotionality. So in terms of big 5 personality traits, their level of agreeableness is, very low. Usually, especially when it comes to dating and stuff, a lot of people have this idea of, they must get all the girls and these sorts of things. All of these are usually things that are going to be in your head in terms of, the imagery that you conjure up when thinking about these things in terms of what is an alpha male, okay? So before I jump into kind of the primate analogy that we are going to be using today when it comes to baboons and chimpanzees, I want to mention something biblical real quick, right? So keep in mind that when the Jews finally got back to the land of Israel, right, after being enslaved by the Egyptians. So they're wandering around for 40 years or whatever. They finally get out of there. They finally get back to Israel. And they're like, okay, God, king time, baby. Let's do this thing. Who's the king? Point him out. Where is he? Right? And God's like, are you kidding me? He's like, I'm the king. He said, I literally just got you out of Egypt. I'm the king, right? But everybody, what everybody would say, right? It's like, yeah, but God, come on, man. Like, we can't see you, right? We need like a king, yeah, like somebody we can see and, who can be like a leader, like in person for us and these things. Can you give us somebody like that? And so God basically face palms and he's like, okay, you know what? If you really need somebody, I'm going to find somebody for y'all. And so he tasks Prophet Samuel to be able to basically, respond to God's calls for this. And he ends up identifying this guy Saul, right? And the way that Saul is described is that he is, this tall, like warrior, jacked guy, he's very handsome. He is that guy, the person whose image in your head you have when we talk about alpha males, right? And initially, Saul was the man, right? He was great, he followed God, he was a good dude, he was following the law, etc., right? The Mosaic law, he was the dude, right? But then the years started to pass, right? And as they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. He was a guy who got really corrupted and basically fell away from God, and essentially even tried to kill the next individual who was in line, who God says, you know what? He now has kind of my anointing, which was King David, right? But David was not like Saul. David was like this little dude, man, right? He was not some like tall, jacked up warrior guy. I mean, just think about, like the classic tale of David and Goliath, right? You had Goliath, who was the same thing, right? Tall, right? Quiet dude, right? Dressed up in all the armor and these sorts of things, had all the weapons. I mean, this was a bad dude, man, right? And then you had David, who's just like Slingshot McGee over here, right? And you'd probably look at him and say, like, this guy's gonna get beaten to hell, right? This guy's just gonna get totally, like taken for a ride. This is not gonna be a good situation, right? But David was the one who had God's anointing. Saul lost it. Didn't matter what he looked like. Didn't matter, anything in terms of how he was acting with regards to, getting respect from other people. God lost respect for him, right? And he, because of that, lost the anointing, right? And so it's the exact same thing, right, when it comes to human beings. But obviously, we're about as far from God as we can get. Luckily, we're never any further from that, right? Because God, never, there's nothing we can do that would make God love us any more or any less. God's love is completely static for us. Now, he honors it, right, when we do things with him, for him, when we lay our needs and our desires at his feet. He deeply, deeply honors that, right? And it is a situation where, we need to be compliant and not compliant because it's like we need somebody to tell us what to do. It's not the case, right? The thing is that compliance with God is compliance in the direction of our own happiness, right? Because God desires our happiness and our health, simply following him is basically following our best interests. People seem to kind of mix that up sometimes, I feel. But in any case, right? So I want you to think about that concept of Saul, right? Even though he seemed to have it all, right? Every earthly thing you would need to be perceived as a leader, perceived as the alpha. In actuality, the true alpha and omega God, right, at the end of the day, ended up selecting David to be the guy that the Israelites truly needed. Not only at that time, we still look back or whatever at King David, who was not some perfect guy. I mean, goodness gracious, the stories or whatever of some of the things he did are terrible, right? However, right, he still was someone who had such a heart for God, right? And he had that anointing. And that, of course, ended up bringing us Jesus, forever later, right? It's a pretty amazing thing in terms of that Davidic bloodline, right? In any case, right? On this channel, so I 100% believe in biological evolution. I know some people listening probably do not believe in biological evolution. I'm not going to have an argument with you on it, right? I would completely disagree with you, but, we don't need to have that argument. But even if you don't agree with biological evolution, I'm sure that you would agree that there's so much that we can learn from animals. And certainly when it comes to, bonobo chimps, just different members of the primate family, fellow members of the primate family, because human beings are primates. What happens is that, we end up having individual species that are more genetically similar to us, like chimps. And if we watch their behavior, is it all going to be, Homo sapien behavior? Of course not. Right? However, it is definitely going to be something that we can learn a lot from, okay? And so, the two different types of primates I want to talk about are baboons and chimps. And you guys know me, I'm very evidence-based. If, there is a significant enough amount of research literature out there, I'm going to be swayed by the opinion on it, all right? So when it comes to baboons, we think about the concept of an alpha male, okay? So baboon alphas are fascinating because I think a lot of people, when they think about the levels of stress that an alpha male is under, they think that it's like not a lot of stress for some reason, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, if you think about an alpha guy, like Homo sapien male, right? They'd be like, oh, well, the alpha male, he, gets all the girls, tall, dark, and handsome, he's got the money, he's got these sorts of things, right? You think about that. Then you look at baboons, right? And in baboons, we're actually able to, take serum levels of things like corticosteroids, like cortisol, right? So these stress hormones, right? And what you see is that in baboons, it's the alpha in the tribe that has the highest cortisol levels, the highest stress hormone levels, right? If you actually graph it out, there's this curve that kind of looks like a hockey stick. And what you see is that if this is the alpha, and these are essentially the males that are at like the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, what you end up seeing is that the lower in the dominance hierarchy you get, the higher your stress levels, which makes sense because essentially your ability to survive, right, let alone to replicate, is threatened. And so because of that, your two biological imperatives, which are survival and replication, are essentially being threatened, right? And because of that, your stress hormones go up, right? Then you start to rise in the dominance hierarchy, right? And the stress levels go down, 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 and I'm defining stress level by serum levels of corticosteroids here, right? But then ironically what happens is that right after that, right when we're getting to the alpha, right, it goes to it's like deepest depth. And then all of a sudden it shoots up for the alpha, right? Now you may say like, well, how does that work? The way that I want you to think about it is essentially like being a runner, or if you ever watch like Tour de France, right? Like I remember growing up watching Tour de France, and and also watching New York City Marathon, Boston Marathon, etc. Right? And what you see is that whoever's the leader, whoever's the person in front, right? All of the wind resistance is coming up against them, and the people directly behind them benefit the most because since all that wind is hitting the first person, right? Everybody else can kind of cruise and kind of chill a little bit, right? They don't have to put in as much effort. We call that drafting, right? It's the exact same thing in these tribes, right? Ironically, people think that the alphas, basically like sit back and they get all the resources and all the women and all these sorts of things, right? Not so with these primates, right? What happens is that instead, their stress levels are through the roof because they are, truly the leader. And so because of that, they have so much more stress than everybody, directly behind them in the dominance hierarchy. So that is something that I've always found very interesting. So that's baboons. Let's go over to chimps for a minute though, right? In chimps, it's interesting because a lot of people always think, well, the way you become the alpha is by destroying all your competition. Just destroy everybody else and then you're gonna come out on top, right? And this is why alphas need to fight all the time. They need to beat everybody up and they need to be dominant, they need to be these sorts of things, right? But interesting, what you see in chimps is that you have to have a coalition. A coalition is the thing that helps you become alpha, okay? In other words, you have kind of partners, basically, and if you keep them happy, then they're going to keep supporting you as being the leader. Think about politics. This is exactly what politics is in Homo sapiens. It's not even a question, it just is, right? Like I used to live in the UK, my first doctorate's from Oxford, right? Over there, you'd have to form a government. This is what ends up happening, right? In terms of, who selects the prime minister. Well, you know what? You need to form a coalition if you don't have enough votes, right? You need enough individuals to basically be supporting you, and then all of a sudden you get selected to be prime minister. It's the same thing in chimps, right? If you want to be the alpha, other people have to support you in being the alpha. You don't just beat up on everybody and make fun of everybody until all of a sudden you get there. That's the most ridiculous thing, right? But people think that. And I do honestly, right? I do think a lot of it has to do with, portrayals in films and, these sorts of things of, the big bad guy and these sorts of things, right? Who's, so popular in the tribe and this kind of stuff, even though frankly he's a bit of a dick, right? But it's like, oh yeah, but still, it's like there's something cool about that. And don't worry, we'll do a whole video about why it is that people are naturally attracted to kind of a bad boy mentality. Interestingly, if you literally just do the same thing in terms of get lower in agreeableness and not emote as much in terms of, facial affect, gestural affect, and paralingual affect, you will get the exact same results as if you were somebody who's just actually a dick, right? You'll get the same results. And what you will end up finding, ironically, is that really does benefit you, especially with members of the opposite sex if you're a man, right? And I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. Right? And we're going to explain exactly the psychological and evolved mechanisms behind why that is. Because once you know, you'll understand it. A lot of people get frustrated. You should never get frustrated, this idea or whatever that, people like bad boys and these things. You shouldn't be frustrated. You should learn why it is and gain that understanding. And once you have it, you can use that information to be more successful, except without going down the line of actually being a jerk, right? They're proxies for all kinds of things, right? And you can do it in a godly and Christian way, right? And still be dominant in that regard. And I'm going to teach you how to do that, okay? In that video. Today, though, we're going to stick with kind of the research that's been done on primates and alpha males, right? So at the end of the day, it's not just that you've got the alpha male being the person where everybody else is kind of drafting behind them, right? And their cortical stress levels are almost protected or whatever, and they're allowed to stay low because you have somebody who is so high. But one of the reasons why stress levels in baboons and in chimps or whatever are very high for the alpha is that the alpha male is what they call the consoler in chief, right? Ironically, they display more empathy than even the females in the tribe. And even in Homo sapiens, what you end up seeing, right, is that at the aggregate level, in terms of big five personality traits, women tend to be more agreeable than men. Now, agreeableness doesn't mean that, people agree to do whatever you want or you're a person pleaser. It's nothing like that, right? Being agreeable basically means that your method of dealing with conflict and navigating conflict in life is essentially through working together, is collaboration, as opposed to kind of head-to-head competition and conflict, right? And so it's not a bad thing in the slightest to be an agreeable person. It is your way of dealing with conflict and navigating life in what you perceive to be the most efficient way, okay? But when it comes to the alpha male in chimp tribes, what you end up seeing again is that they're so empathetic, right? And it's not sympathetic. It's not looking and saying, wow, that really stinks. It's getting to the level of emotional closeness with the other chimps in the tribe that the alpha male is genuinely taking on the feelings and putting themselves in the place psychologically of the other chimp and is feeling the same things that they're feeling. And it's something that obviously makes them very effective leaders, right? It's one of the reasons why women are very effective leaders in general. If you take a look at industrial organizational psychology literature, you'll end up seeing that. But the other thing the other point to be able to be made here, right, is that when you think again of your little George Washington, concept in your head, the likelihood is that the guy that you're imagining is the least, empathic guy ever. He's very cold. He basically, has we call it a 30-degree asymmetrical smile, right? And basically, even if the eyebrow flashes, the eyelids don't open, right? But besides that, there's really very little smiling, little eye contact, and these sorts of things. It couldn't be further from the truth in terms of what we see in other primate species, okay? In terms of who the real leaders are, as opposed to the conception of what those leaders look like, okay? We also see that in terms of, this concept of coalition and being empathetic, something that naturally comes from that we see in the animal kingdom is that in chimps, the alpha male impartially stands up for the underdog, which is very strange, right? Because, usually if you take a look at the chimps, they are very partial to the people who help them get to where they are, right, to their coalition members. But if you have somebody who's really low in the dominance hierarchy, who's like the underdog, who's like, trying to do something to be able to help the tribe, and everybody's kind of like, whatever, the alpha chimp, right, will be the one to stand up for the underdog and basically bring them into the fold, which is fascinating to me. Because again, this concept of your little George Washington image in your head is usually not that at all. But when you think about true men, not these little boys who are cold and unemotional and unempathic, right? If you think about a real man is an individual who knows exactly what they're doing in terms of taking the underdog under their wing, especially if the underdog is showing that they want to put the labor and put the work in to become a better individual, a better human being, right? There's somebody who consoles people when they're in genuine pain, doesn't run away from them or bully them or anything like this, and also has a group of individuals around them who basically iron sharpens iron, right? Every guy needs a tribe, okay? It can be a tribe of only men, it can be a mixed tribe of men and women. It doesn't matter what it is, right? I do believe that all men need groups of only exclusively other men to hang out with, right? I think that's very important. A lot of people, what we end up seeing in the literature is, they get into long-term relationships, we get married, and then all of a sudden or whatever, we don't have our guy time anymore. Or the idea of, being out with the boys is something that's kind of frowned upon. And per usual, listen, everything in moderation, right? But it is very important for men to have a tight-knit group of male friends. It's even an archetypal thing. Think about any archetypal story. Think about Star Wars, right? you got Luke, you also got Han Solo, and he's got Chewbacca, and you got Yoda, and you got all these guys, right? Think about Lord of the Rings or whatever, that tight-knit group of guys. Any archetypal story, hero story like that, right? Think about, I mean, the original hero story is Epic of Gilgamesh, right? He was like Batman, and he had Robin, whose name was Enkidu, was the name of the character, right? But he still had this little miniature tribe. It could just be one person, it could be 10 people, whatever, right? You know, Jesus or whatever, he had his little group of guys. Can you imagine somebody being like, hey, Simon Peter, listen, you're spending too much time with the boys, right? Like, no, you need that, right? It is so essential for men to be able to have each other, right? In that fellowship sense, right? I call it mellowship, right? Man fellowship, right? So I think it's really important to be able to have mellowship time is what I've come to call it for my small group, right? But again, keep in mind what a man actually is and the perception that we have of masculinity can be two entirely different things because of things like media portrayals, etc. And then we basically, ingrain them into our brains. And there's certain things where it does make sense. Like, for example, and I think we've talked about it in another video, otherwise I'll make one for you, right? In terms of things like, why is it that being tall is a very sensible thing to find physically attractive in men, right? It makes perfect sense. Right, so ladies, if you're just like, I like taller guys, I agree with you. It's great, no problem. Like, I understand why you think it's great. I get that, right? Like, I understand why in all but, one of my relationships, the women that I've dated have always been at least 3 inches, shorter than myself. And that's usually, when I do matchmaking, I usually use this rule of 3 inches at least, right? So the girl's 5'5", the guy's got to be at least 5'8". And a lot of people be like, yeah, I only like people 6 foot and above, right? Well, I mean, the problem with 6 foot and above is only 14% of men in the United States are 6 foot and above. And when you add other things onto that, like he's got to be, 6 feet and above, he's got to be single, he's got to be a guy. I'm sure you want him to be college educated or have a good job, in, decent shape, not insanely out of shape, right? Undernourished or, the opposite end of the spectrum. And you add just a few more things or whatever to it, and you're looking at like a fraction of a percentage of the population who you have or whatever at your disposal. If you use the 3-inch rule, you're gonna have a much better shot of finding somebody who has other things that you're really interested in. And at the end of the day, always remember that, guys, for women to find us attractive, it's essential that we provide the perception of physical security, right? And of course, for men who are very tall, that's very easy because, hey, I got a big guy standing next to me, right? Hey, fantastic, right? That gives me that perception automatically. But if emotionally, you give that perception to your partner that she is safe with you physically, right? And again, do women need to be, protected such that you're carrying a gun and like looking around every corner? Well, of course, that'd be silly. Of course not, right? But the perception that if somebody came up and was trying to mug both of you together on a date, the perception needs to be there that you would not, throw your wallet on the ground and run 2 blocks down that way while she's still standing there with a mugger, right? Which, of course, hopefully, would never happen. But if a mugging does occur, she wants the perception that you're going to be there standing up or whatever and taking control of that situation, right? That is attractive. And that is a primal attraction switch. Hopefully that never happens, but it is one of the 3 primal attraction switches for women. And I have another video all about kind of the 3 fundamental needs of women and the 3 fundamental needs of men to be able to be found attractive by the opposite sex. That I will be sure to include as a link or a card or whatever they call it here on YouTube, okay? So anyway, moral of the story at the end of the day, big strong bullies, not necessarily alpha males at the end of the day, okay? Think about, you want to be with a David, you don't want to be with a Saul. Being with a Saul is a short-term sexual strategy, as they call it in evolutionary psych, right? Short-term strategy, right? You're more likely to be attracted to a guy like Saul, right? Basically directly before ovulation, right? That is biologically what you end up seeing. And when you're in luteal phase of ovulation, you're much more likely to be attracted to a guy like a David, right? Who's much more like a long-term provider of these things. That's a long-term care strategy, right? And these rules change, the ovulatory rules change depending on whether you're on the birth control pill or not, on any number of things. This is the most fascinating thing, I think, right? And if you have any other questions, you want to me to make any more videos on that kind of stuff, just let me know. Ask some questions in the comments below, and I'm more than happy to be able to, do the background research for you and share with you what I've done. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a blessing to have you here. Please do, if you're interested in getting in touch with me, you can contact me via my personal website below. You can also sign up for one-on-one or group date coaching if you're single, or also if you're currently in a relationship, or you're engaged, or you've been married for a while. It'd be a blessing to be able to work with you, to be able to statistically improve your likelihood of relational success. That's what I'm all about. It's all about, evidence-based stuff, not giving you my personal advice on things or my anecdotal guidance or just culturally what people want to say. No. We're going to focus on what the research says you can do, right? That's what I'm a big believer in, and we're going to couch it in the faith. Okay? And whether you're a believer or not, you're always so welcome to be able to join me on this channel. Again, it's amazing. I mean, I was an atheist for most of my life. I totally get it. Don't get me wrong, right? And you're more than welcome to watch my testimony, which is a video on this channel as well. I think it's going to be the first one that was uploaded. At the end of the day, though, guys, if you would like me to come and speak with your congregation about these sorts of things, it would be a blessing to do that. Again, you can contact me via my website. It's got my email address on there. And in the meanwhile, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Don't forget to get out there, take chances, and always be your best self. God bless you. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed that episode and you'd like to see more original content, then please do click on one of the links right here. I hope to see you in the next one.